Good afternoon and welcome to everybody to the Future EdTech at London Tech Week 2021. My name's Eva Froud and I'm Head of Business Development at Unibuddy. And I really am delighted to be involved in this session this afternoon, where we're very much going to be looking at globalization, learning without borders, and really reflecting over the last 18 months on how the COVID pandemic has probably affected the way in which we're delivering our higher education learning and what the impact has been and how we see the future. So I'm delighted to be joined by Therese Bird, who's educational designer at the University of Leicester. Thank you for joining us, Therese. We've also got on the call this afternoon David White, who's Head of Technology and Enhanced Learning at the University of the Arts London, and Ian Lowe, Director of Solutions Marketing for EMEA at Okta. So thank you to everyone for joining me this afternoon. And without further ado, I'd be delighted if you could introduce yourselves. It would be wonderful to hear a bit more about how you came to be in the role that you're in today at your various organisations and institutions. So Therese, hello, welcome.
Hello, thank you so much. This is really exciting. So, my first degree was in math and computer science, and I was recruited to come over to the University of Wales, Bangor, to look after their Macintosh lab. And it was the School of Psychology, where they focus on learning and how do humans learn, and especially how do humans learn with the intervention of technology. So that's when I got into that research, which eventually landed me at the University of Leicester, where I am now, and where I got my master's in international education by distance while I was working at the university. So it was kind of total immersion there. And now I work for the medical school, where technology in learning is a major thing. And we were the first medical school to do a 1 iPad per student program for all 5 years of medicine. And that's really where I'm focusing these days.
Great, thank you. Ian, how about you?
Yeah, so my name's Ian Lowe. I lead our EMEA solutions marketing team here at Okta. And I've been in technology for a very long time, since forever. And my first job, actually, even before I finished school, was a technology company in California. So I was going to school at University of British Columbia in Vancouver in Canada. And yeah, I got asked to come in and lead a team over in California, and I couldn't say no to that. So yeah, I've been in technology for a very long time, and I've always been in the security realm. So the very first job was a startup which worked on speech recognition as a service technology, which has now been acquired by a much larger company. And now I'm at Okta, where we power identity for the internet. And it's a fantastic organization.
Wow, that does sound fascinating. I'd love to hear more, but I'm sure we will touch on that. Finally, last but certainly not least, David, hello.
Hello, yes. So I guess when I was an undergrad, everything was just shifting from analog to digital, and the web came along. I think I used the first web browser ever whilst I was an undergrad. And then ever since then, I've been somewhere at the intersection between sort of academia, teaching and learning, and digital, and wending my way through there. So I worked in the National History Unit, Natural, not National History Unit at the BBC, working on some of their very early web stuff. I worked at the University of Oxford, developing fully online distance courses there, which was quite a sort of radical thing to do at the time. And then I found my way sort of back to the creative arts, which was my undergraduate and postgraduate education at the University of Arts London. I've been there for about 7 years, and obviously that's fascinating. We're moving more and more into fully online, which is, you know, has its own challenges when you've got subject areas that are about making things physically. So that's the kind of new challenge that's ahead of me at the university.
And a big one. Absolutely. I've realised I probably ought to have said a little bit more about myself before introducing the other panelists. So yeah, I'm head of business development at Unibuddy, but have spent in my former life over 15 years in higher education in marketing communications. So having began in academia, moved to professional services, where I held the post of head of student recruitment and widening participation at Oxford Brookes University, as well as head of outreach and recruitment at Queen Mary University of London. So having been a customer of Unibuddy previously, my life shifted to one of entering the commercial world and heading up business development. And in that time, I've been really privileged to see the use of the Unibuddy platform, which is a digital communications tool, putting prospective students in touch with current students primarily, as well as live events, staff chat, lots of different facets of the platform. But it's been a real privilege in the last 3.5 years to see our customer base and partner base grow from about 15 to over 500 universities using the platform globally. So I think that sort of brings me on to bringing this sort of conversation to a start about the shift in use of new technology and e-learning, digital learning, online education, but also the use of a variety of different digital platforms that's really been accelerated. You know, we've seen universities pivot incredibly quickly and have kept up with all other sectors actually in regard to their response to the COVID-19 pandemic. At Unibuddy alone, we've seen a huge surge in online engagement. We've seen a 92% increase in sign-ups. That's prospective students just accessing the platforms to talk to other students online, which is no surprise. 1,056% increase in the number of messages that are sent across the platform. This is since the outbreak of the pandemic, and a 900% increase in live events that have been hosted on our platform. So I think really our first question here is, with online education enabling universities to really reach a wider audience, they can break into new territories, break down geographical barriers, and have far greater reach globally in terms of their offering. What have you witnessed within your various roles at your institutions and organisations over the past 18 months? And really sort of quite generally, what has the pandemic accelerated, perhaps both good and bad? David, I'll start with you. What have you seen in the last 18 months?
Well, I think I'd begin by saying that I think what we discovered right at the start of the pandemic, that we were probably more digital already than we thought we were, because in theory, everything should have broken and it didn't. And I think it's because we actually operated a lot online already. What happened with us, and I think it happened across higher education quite broadly, unless you were a kind of provider that did quite a lot of fully online courses, was that there was an immediate drive to recreate the face-to-face but online. And sometimes that created quite exhausting situations whereby, let's say, if you had a teaching session that was all afternoon on Tuesdays, you just do that all afternoon in Zoom or Teams or Collaborate or whatever it might be. And that sort of doesn't work. And so I think what's happened as the pandemic's gone on for longer and longer is that we've found better and better ways of reimagining how we teach rather than replicating how we teach. And it wasn't that a lot of those practices weren't already known, but they were new to a lot of people who were used to kind of predominantly face-to-face teaching. And I'd say, a bit like in other areas of society and culture, what the pandemic did and what moving to digital did in such a kind of abrupt and radical way is it amplified both the good and the bad, as you're saying. I think where there were challenges with the way that we did things face to face, it was totally obvious. You just couldn't hide when you went online. Where there was really good practice that was really effective and that was reimagined rather than mirrored, I think our students really appreciated that. So you get this really interesting tension, I think is one way of characterizing it, whereby there was much greater level of flexibility, so people could get together and do things together in a much more agile manner, because you didn't have to get on a tube or on a bus or whatever. You didn't have to book a room. You didn't have to book sandwiches. You didn't have to worry about how many people turned up. But on the other end of things, I think that because there was this loss of place, a sense of place that you get with physical buildings, is that while everybody was meeting, I'm sure we've all had this experience, while everybody was meeting very quickly with lots of different groups of people working very, very effectively and dynamically, there was still this sense of you know, a bit of a sense of alienation, a bit of a sense of being distanced, perhaps a loss of a sense of belonging, or an amplification of a lack of belonging that might have been there already. And so, you know, areas around togetherness, presence, belonging, those kind of areas are where we're really focusing now, because we recognize that buildings are really good for that. Not for everyone, but for a lot of people. And with digital, you've got to very explicitly design that facilitation in. It doesn't come for free. And so that was the hard part. Now, just to finish up, I think we've just got to be very careful to say some of that was because we were in a global pandemic, and it was, and you know, we still are, and it was a really, really difficult time. Some of it is because of the affordances of digital. It picking that apart is really, really difficult, and I think we're still picking that apart, and we will be for years. You know, what was due to what and why.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that that absence of human interaction, and as you say, that connectedness and sense of belonging, how we've been able to recreate that online and digitally is still a challenge now. Therese, how has your experience been?
Well, while most of our university, similar to what David just described, struggled with, do we just do everything in a webinar environment that we used to just do face to face, you know, and then actually got a bit old quick, realizing that actually it's okay to do asynchronous learning. That was sort of what people started to move towards. But we in medicine had a totally different situation, because our students had to go onto clinic right during the pandemic. And guess what? Most of them got COVID, and they were young enough to recover fine, so we didn't have any great problems with that. But you know, they had to go out and help. And yet there were infection control issues, which meant that they did have to do more sort of online learning as well as being on the clinic. And that was really, you know, a little bit mind bending to try to figure out how to do that, because, you know, these are future doctors. They need to be out there. And so I really had to help our clinical teachers to think about, how are you going to teach? What is theoretical that can be taught online, and what must be done face to face with the patient, with other doctors on uh, in the clinic? And going through all of that, we're still resolving that. We're still coming up with that. And it's actually been a great opportunity, a really, really good opportunity to help some sort of, shall we say, entrenched practices to, you know, force everybody to rethink and go, okay, how do we learn? It's okay to learn this theoretical stuff online. You can do a chat online. You can do a discussion with other students online, you know, but then we all have to meet at the clinic to do thus and so. So yeah, so ours was, I think the health professions are always going to be a little bit different from the rest of the university, and that's what happened to us.
And I think that that's not limited to health and practical courses. I think one of the things that we, and it's another discussion, not for today, but really before we start looking at the future of international education and students sort of transitioning across borders, is looking at the effectiveness of online education and the extent to which it is likely to replace traditional classroom teaching, and whether we have seen you know, a shift one way, or whether we will be returning back. And I think we've probably got to defend against a temptation to refer back to the sort of status quo, and that actually really develop a hybrid approach that I think, as David was saying, really does leverage the distinct benefits of which pieces of digital and e-learning, you know, the key benefits of that strategy, as well as really leveraging the key benefits of in-person and face-to-face activity. So I think it's about really transforming a hybrid approach. Ian, how about you at Okta? How's that been?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, we see all sorts of different industries and organizations, you know, and the effect that the pandemic has had on them. And, you know, one is what David has said and what yourself has said, which is acceleration, right? Everything is accelerated from an IT and a digital transformation perspective, whether we were ready or not, we had to. This is both exciting and it's also challenging for IT personnel within our organizations, our institutions. But it's exciting because it confirms how critical technology is to, moving forward, to all of us doing, more, being better and just learning more easily, effectively. And I think the other piece that really has come to fore is this hybrid nature. I mean, not only are we having to learn in a hybrid manner now, and I think that will continue to grow in that model, but we're seeing that in our workforces as well, right? We've got this hybrid nature of the workplace, and the workplace is changing. So that's, I think, really exciting for us. One of the things we've noticed is there's a really interesting a report that came out from McKinsey, where projects like enabling remote learning and remote collaboration went from being delivered on average, it took about 2 years, or well, just under 2 years, 450 days to deliver. Those are now being delivered in 10 and a half days. So that just shows you the acceleration that was happening. But I think what we have to do now is kind of take a step back and look at, well, what is it that the people need? Because we might have implemented some extra technology to, quickly adapt to this change. And did we do that just as a silo to solve a single problem? How do we now take a look back at what is it that our users actually need now to have this hybrid collaboration? Is the technology that we have in place implemented the right way? Are we taking a central view? And if we think about it, the thing that defines our technology and how we use it and the experience that we have with it all starts with our identity online. So have we implemented identity in the right way? Are we having to use multiple logins for multiple applications? Or can we have a single login for all of those applications and really improve that experience and make it more accessible?
Absolutely. David, did you have anything to add in response to the shift that we've seen? Before we start I'm going to sort of navigate our discussion more towards the topic of globalization and international education and the implications of what we've seen so far. But before we sort of talk more specifically about that, is there any other reflections on the last 18 months? Not only the benefits that we've seen, but perhaps some of those sort of the problems that may have occurred with the rapid shift that we've seen.
Well, I'd say we're about to go into the most challenging period for higher education, certainly because of the hybrid nature of things. So what we've got now is a student body who, quite rightly, I think, are probably going to be expecting everything to be available face-to-face and everything to be available online. And if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's trying to do both at once is really hard. No matter how good the technology is, it's a really, really difficult thing to do. And the next 6 months or so is going to be fascinating to watch. I've got this mild theory that students will demand a lot of face-to-face, but won't necessarily take it up. But we'll see. I could be totally wrong about that. So I don't think we can exactly predict the pattern of things over the next 6 months. We're going to have to watch very, very closely, and we're going to have to be very careful about how we support our staff and our students to sort of navigate these there's suddenly a myriad of ways of engaging and a myriad of ways of disengaging. And there's a risk that we end up taking something like the traditional HE course and kind of fracturing it over a million different places and a million different channels. Just everybody trying to sincerely do the best job that they can, it can really easily get out of hand. So one way of looking at it is that I think the technology allows us to be agile and flexible to an extent that we're not capable of managing yet. And we might just completely exhaust ourselves. So it's going to take a while for that to emerge. It's a bit like flexible working. It's like, what does it now mean to be a professional is still a live question. What does it now mean to study is a live question. What does it mean to be a university is now a fluid concept. Got a brilliant bit of feedback from some research that we commissioned, where they said it's not a question of what you want to hold on to from the pandemic. The university has fundamentally changed. A lot of your students, the pandemic version of the university is the only version of the university they've ever engaged with. So I think all of our institutions have fundamentally changed. And it's going to take us a while to find out what that means.
Absolutely. And I think you're right to touch on the staff time and resource and really the feasibility. What we can't do is replicate everything that's existed face to face and does exist face to face online as well. There is a finite amount of staff time and resource to enable us to deliver high quality teaching and learning in the most appropriate way, as you touched on with those courses that require laboratories and practical applications and clinic based learning on site. Is that something that's been an issue over the course of the pandemic, to see this shift, how staff have managed to deliver both face to face and online? Has there been difficulties in terms of managing expectations?
I'd say definitely. I mean, for us, it was of as well compounded by the fact that these were doctors working through a pandemic as well as having to teach at the same time, and so that they were losing staff, and then there were fewer of them, so then we had to step up online learning and teaching. We at the university had to sort of step up and fill in for what the clinic could not deliver because they were going off or filling in for colleagues. It was incredibly confusing, and so challenging. And everybody's sort of mental health kind of took a toll. But one thing that really did come out of it was that it's in our case, yeah, the students enjoy kind of aspects of online learning, but the staff really appreciated being able to teach online, and that was something that we didn't really at least in medicine, we didn't really step into that very much in the past, was the staff teaching online. We would bring in the occasional expert in pancreatic cancer or something from say California or something. Like we would do things like that, but it was not a typical thing. But now suddenly staff are realizing, I'm so busy as a clinician. It's so easy for me to just teach this webinar style, and I don't have to kind of get myself down to the university or something like that. And it sort of made them think a little bit more broadly. And I think that's really great. And I just sort of wanted to um, my challenge now is to help them to think not just in terms of place, but in terms of how. These different ways of teaching. It could be synchronous. It could be asynchronous. It could be, it could actually be through a game. It could be through something like this. And these things can broaden our thinking about learning in a situation.
Absolutely. Ian, the big question with the move to more online accessibility of learning resources, teaching, pre-recorded sessions, students being able to go back and revisit obviously recorded sessions, and with the development of e-learning across a number of different technologies. What do you think this is going to see a decline in the number of international students and the sort of globalization of the education sector, or will there never be the removal of that need for the cultural immersion and exposure that students are looking for by studying abroad?
Actually, I think this opens up an opportunity for many universities to expand their reach. I mean, if you got a hybrid approach or a internet first or mobile first strategy, you can adopt. You have a bigger opportunity to bring students in from other parts of the world. I mean, it just opens you up. I think that's one of the things that I see, and we're seeing that from some of our customers. So it's about asking and thinking about how do you enhance your online presence, and did you just turn this on, like I said earlier, did you just turn this on as a silo, or do you have a whole 360 approach to how you deliver these new hybrid experiences that are a combination of both online and in person? And do you have the support structures in place? And this is putting, and Dave was kind of touching this earlier, it's kind of, and so was Therese, sorry, this is putting a big burden on the IT department and the faculty and the staff in terms of, well, what does onboarding look like in a real remote world? How do I vet and identify and trust that the person I'm speaking to is the person that's enrolled? How do I manage the access to the applications, to the video calling, whether I'm using Teams or whether I'm using Zoom or whatever it might be? How do I ensure that those logins are delivered to the right person? How do I validate that? How do I put the trust structures in place? And there are technologies that enable us to do that. And at Okta, that's what we help a lot of our customers do. And customers like the University of Notre Dame in the US, they have over 80 country logins around the world from different students that they've managed to implement. Over 18,000 students, faculty, and staff are accessing their apps every day to do this. So you can enable this, and you can put these trust structures in place, but you have to take that step back and look at, well, what is an identity? What are the applications and the services that I need to enable online for students to access? And how do I change and adapt my learning? I think Dave is right. The style and change, it can't just be a replication of what we've always done in the past and in the face-to-face environments. There's a new way of learning and a new way of delivering that learning. So I think more and more, every university is becoming a technology company like every other company in the world.
I'd just like to jump in and agree with that. It's sort of like the challenge was, now that the staff really want to teach online more, all of the professional staff just have to up their game in terms of digital literacy, digital fluency. People who never felt that they needed to really engage in digital before, there's no choice now. Everybody's got to do it. All the teachers have to do it. All the staff have to do it. And yeah, that's been really the whirlwind of the last 18 months, but I think it's a fruitful thing. I think it needed to happen, and it will enable, as you said, the reach. I think it'll enable the reach to go further.
So, I mean, universities have been digital and online for a good 20 odd years. So I think what's happened is the pandemic's been a tipping point for that. And now it's going to be strange if your university doesn't have some kind of online offer or some kind of way of accessing the education from outside of the originating country, I guess, or without having to get on a train or move your whole life to another city. I think there are a number of sort of risky things about it. One of them is that the perennial risk that online learning will be seen in deficit terms. So we've seen that throughout the whole pandemic, despite the fact that online learning kind of saved the whole sector. Throughout, the message was, well, it's not as good as face-to-face. When the answer is, well, it's not much fun if you've signed up for face-to-face and then you get thrown online by a pandemic. Nobody wanted that. But actually, it's just different. It has different pros, it has different cons. So I worry slightly that there's going to be sort of two cultures. There's going to be the people who can afford to move country and move town. And then there's going to be the people who do online. And I don't want online to be seen like that, because I think actually online has all kinds of levels of flexibility, accessibility. If it's designed right, it can be incredibly inclusive. So when the pandemic hit, there was a lot of concern about the potential inclusivity or exclusivity of online. But in my mind, only being able to do an undergraduate or postgraduate degree by moving country or by moving city is quite an exclusive thing. So I think we have to really keep our eye on those factors. The other thing, and I think this is a big deal for the sector, is, and this is picking up on what others have said, is that I think universities are now at least as digital as they are physical, if not more, by quite some way. But what I see is that the cultural conception of university is about 40 years behind that. So it's still a building. It's a bit like people claim that libraries are books on shelves, when in actual fact libraries are a myriad of digital things and modes of engagement. And so it's going to be really interesting to see. I think the institutions that will do really well are the ones that manage to reconceive of themselves as being as much digital as they are physical. So the digital aspects of what they do is fundamentally part of the identity of the institution, rather than something that kind of bolts on the side of the real institution, which is the one that happens to have, which is the building conception of it. And I think, picking up on what Ian was saying, IT departments, technology departments have been working so hard over the pandemic and have been working really, really hard for years. Anybody who works in that area knows for a fact that their university is about 80% digital. They know that for a fact. So I'm going to be keeping a really close eye on how higher education institutions kind of perceive themselves and how they project that identity. And I pick up from a great distance and hold people to account if they accidentally characterize online as being a kind of poor cousin to face-to-face, when in actual fact, in many ways, it's much richer.
Absolutely, and the kind of levelling of the playing field, the reach, what we've seen, the impact on widening participation and accessibility through greater ability for remote learning, and certainly interacting with institutions through the recruitment process with virtual open days, virtual events, taster activities, mentoring programs. It really has enabled students who might be restricted by the logistics, the costs, and other things that have been prohibitive for them engaging with institutions previously. It really has something that's sort of overcome many barriers. Keeping us anchored in the question and the topic of our session this afternoon about the impact on international student mobility and whether or not we're going to see a sort of decline. One of the questions here was, do we think it's likely that UK universities will receive fewer international students or fewer numbers of applications? Well, interestingly, University and Colleges Admission Service in the UK, UCAS, in September last year, we don't quite yet have the data for now, but saw a 9% increase in international students last year, 2% decrease in EU applications. But I think it's such a broader question about global politics, I think, than just about the pandemic here. I think, the US has seen a decline in international students, but I think that could be to do with tensions around immigration and hostility towards sort of immigrants, perhaps. I think tensions between China and the US and caps on student visas. And I think we've done a great thing in reintroducing the post-study visa in the UK for students to remain, as well as our teaching quality and standards being something that's been beneficial. I mean, I personally feel that even where we've seen deferrals, we're going to see a surge actually in those students that perhaps did defer because of the wrongful perception of digital and online learning being something that's the poor cousin of face-to-face interaction. So I'm confident that this isn't something that we're going to see a long-term shift and decline in the movement of students globally, certainly not to UK institutions, for the reasons that I've mentioned. Therese, is that something that you agree with, or are you seeing a future that might be somewhat different? Any insights on that point?
Well, I would say I think students do like to go places. So, students do want to go and study somewhere. But I mean, I like the caution that David just mentioned of us considering online learning to be the poor cousin or something. I mean, I mentioned I did my master's online, and it wasn't with the Open University, although I love the Open University. That's, it's something that could be rolled out further. So yeah, so while students do like to go places, I think we would really be foolish in the world of universities if we don't I'll say capitalize on what we've learned, and start to put into practice what we've learned, be able to roll out further what we've learned. I mean, in my department, we've just started a joint project with a medical school in China, but just because of quarantine restrictions that have been in the last few months, people couldn't go between the two as we had hoped. And so I just recently found myself teaching the staff in China how to teach online with the VLE and webinar systems that we have been using here in the UK all this time. So it's sort of, spreading the reach in that way. And honestly, I don't see why this couldn't be rolled out to many other programs. And particularly what we learned in medicine is, I mean, David, you mentioned making things. So I got to show you our 3D printed skull, which we had to do more. We had to do a lot more 3D printing and of human organs and things like that for our first year students who could not come in and work with the cadavers as they did in the past because of COVID. But that really pushed us to go further, not just with the printing, but even with the imaging. So we could share the imaging over the our iPads, and students could get to see more, what the even better than working with the cadaver, because you could flip it around and see what it's really like. Um, and we're hoping to share that with our new partners in China. So I think there's a lot of sparking off that can be happening now that we've been pushed to innovate into some of these ways. And I hope we don't miss the chance.
I think innovation is absolutely key. At Unibuddy, one of the things that's been introduced is artificial intelligence, picking out keywords and topics of conversations that students are having, the market intelligence that we can glean from online conversations, and being able to use machine learning to be able to really capitalize on those organic conversations. We can understand the fears, preconceptions, questions that prospective students have about an institution. And that really tells us a lot about the sort of perception of various institutions. And that's incredibly valuable for them to then better tailor their outbound marketing communications to various audiences. So that, along with a number of different developments. And I think online learning, the ability to incorporate the development, understand the development of student learning, and about that automation, I think, is something that's been embraced by institutions as well, to constantly develop and be reactive to student learning and the needs and wants of the student body. Is that something, Ian, in terms of adaptation over the last 18 months, in terms of learning particularly, that you've seen innovation happen at pace?
Yeah, well, what we're seeing is not only innovation, but modernization, right? It's really given, and well, it's not just given, institutions and universities the opportunity to modernize. It's kind of forced them to accelerate modernization of their IT systems. So many, there's a real, I guess, variance in implementation of cloud services from different universities that we work with. So some are very, traditional and have lots of on-premise deployments of VPNs where you're accessing different things, as well as a mix of cloud applications. There's some who are very cloud-centric and cloud-first. So it's given a lot of those organizations that have been more legacy, built up IT, a chance to think about how they need to modernize so they can then innovate. And it's all about having that modern baseline, that modern infrastructure in place so that you can focus on innovation. And it's not just innovation on, learning and learning models and that kind of stuff, but it's innovation even on business models. How does the university go about and deliver new services and new experiences to those students? And how do they monetize that necessarily? And that's where, if you have a cloud-first approach, you can start to do that. And again, you need to sort of sit down and think about, well, what are all of the different identities involved? I've got students, I've got faculty, I've got other different identities, customers and partners that I need to work with. How does that all work together if my infrastructure isn't in a modern place?
Absolutely. And I think we've only got sort of 5 minutes left of our discussion, and I certainly don't want to bring it to a close prematurely. I think what this is really begging the question is, what trends within technology can you see making impact in the next 3 to 5 years? David mentioned the McKinsey research, which showed that we've gone from, I think, 450 days, was it, David, to suddenly think the implementation within a 10.
I think that might have been Ian.
It was one of my stats. Yeah, so 450 days down to like 25 days. Yeah.
I mean, that's just in
40.9.
terms of seeing how the impact has been and how things have changed and moved forward. So are there any trends within technology that you've seen to date, within or outside of the education sphere, that you really think you're going to see making an impact over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, yeah, I think that the number one tenet, and we've talked about this consistently throughout this chat, is the acceleration and adoption of more modern technology, so cloud applications, a mobile first approach, and with that, adoption of artificial intelligence, so that they can and automation of a lot of processes that the cloud brings you, and that scaling and scalability that the cloud brings you, that flexibility to scale up and scale down depending on where we are in a pandemic or some other resilience type issues or events. And yeah, taking what we call in the IT security world a zero trust approach to all of our logins and our authentications and our accessibility to all of our online interactions, and really taking a step back and looking at identity. We've seen a big focus on identity and how that actually is the central pillar to delivering trust in all of those online experiences.
So from my perspective, I've got a good trend and a risky trend. So my good trend, I think, from thinking about University Arts London is basically online collaboration and working together internationally on difficult problems and design problems, whatever they might be, together. I think technologies that I think of as spatial collaboration, you could think of them as, sort of digital post-it notes, arrows, a video chat on the side, bit of text chat here, those kind of technologies became incredibly important because of the nature of our subjects. But I see a real trend in people collaborating and choosing to do that first online and second face to face. It's a bit less train travel, a bit less plane travel, but just as much, if not more, getting together to figure out tricky things, maybe even on a kind of multidisciplinary basis. I think that's super positive. The dangerous actually picks up on a phrase that you've been using, Ian, which is trust. And trust is an interesting sort of word, is that there's always a risk that the more technology we have, the more we use it to police rather than to create opportunities. And so there's a bit of a danger that the online higher education institution becomes an institution that's kind of less generous towards its students and less trusting of its students because of what the technology allows them to do. Because if you can see a bit of data, then it's very difficult to put that toothpaste back in the tube. So I think one of the things that we need to really keep an eye on is data rights, data charters, who gets to see what on what basis, so that it's obvious to students what data is being collected on them, what it's being used for, and how it helps them. Personally, I don't want to see a kind of 100% corporatization of higher education because it's gone a bit more digital. We have to try and keep a particular distinct character to higher education institutions that has a sort of generosity to allow people to take risks, to allow people to fail, to kind of facilitate their learning and their kind of becoming as individuals. So that's the other end of identity. So if you like, it's like the tension between identity, the hardcore kind of identity data technology, which of course we need, and then the kind of identity of people becoming the next version of themselves through their education.
I can jump in with some technologies that I think we're going to see as well. So I showed you, and I totally agree with you guys. And especially with the artificial intelligence, I know that it's sometimes used as a sort of surveillance tool amongst students, and I very hesitant to want to go down that road. But I know that ours and other medical schools are interested in using artificial intelligence to help our students to be able to see, like, many different cases of this certain illness, and but these kinds of treatments resulted thus and so. And we're not the only medical school that's starting to look at this sort of thing, just to help us to learn clinical diagnosis, patient safety, a lot of issues like this where artificial intelligence can be very beneficial. I mentioned the 3D printing, 3D imaging. I think is really going to even be more helpful because it kind of goes faster over the wires. A lot of medical schools and other other disciplines as well are looking at virtual reality, 360 video with interaction in there, augmented reality, even mixed reality. Some of these are very expensive, but they don't have to be expensive. You know, a Google Cardboard is just a few quid, and the student can look at it through their phone, and they can feel like they're in the already on the hospital ward. Our students have made some videos like that, which help, you know, when you're just going onto the ward for the first time, you're terrified, but looking at this video the night before sort of allays your fears. This is what it's going to be like. And just to kind of, I don't know if I've got time to throw this in here, but I think working with the learners themselves just helps so much. You know, I've been able to go faster because of student power, because students know how they want to learn, and you talk to them about it, you work with them, they can help to create the learning, and that just sort of speeds up the process, makes it more authentic, makes it more useful to them.
How beautifully put, Therese, thank you. And I think coming back to the student at the heart of everything we've talked about this afternoon, I think is incredibly important. I think we're going to have to leave it there before we get timed out. But Ian, thank you for bringing those insights from Okta and understanding more about trust and about, you know, and about the digital experience and security. And I think that's been really made me pause for thought. And I think, David, as well as you've said, this sort of tension between making sure that digital and e-learning is not something that we see as secondary to that of face-to-face. We really do need to leverage the distinct benefits of the different types of learning experience, both within and outside of education. And Therese, that 3D printed skull, it's disappeared, but it's incredible to see. Thank you, to see innovation and technology so obviously impacting on the world of medical research and medical education. So I wish we had longer. I wish we had more time to hear a bit more about what we see making an impact over the next 3 to 5 years. But thank you all very much. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and I hope to see you all again soon.
Yeah, it's a pleasure meeting everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye now.
Bye. Bye.